I was really looking forward to watching A Town Without Christmas because I love Christmas films. I love Patricia Heaton. I had a feeling I would really like this. Unfortunately, I found it to be pretty average. And if you're just looking for an average film, that's great. I think my expectations were maybe a little too high. But at the same time, I do recommend it, so I'm not going to give any spoilers. I also feel like it's maybe really predictable in some places, but maybe not so much in others. This was released in 2001. It's directed by Andy Wolk, written by Michael J. Murray, and stars, of course, Patricia Heaton as MJ and Rick Roberts as David. And their stories intertwine because MJ is a reporter and she is reluctantly taking on a Christmas story, because a letter has been written by a young child called Chris, who basically says, if Santa doesn't come and visit me, I'm going to take my life. It's not as blunt as that. It's clearly written by a child who is impoverished, maybe doesn't have anybody who cares for them, and the letter basically says, please, Santa, tell me you're real, come and visit me on Christmas Eve, or I will come to heaven to be with you. And honestly, I didn't love that angle. I don't think we needed the whole I will come and visit you in heaven angle. First of all, what child thinks Santa Claus is in heaven? I've never heard of that before. Maybe it is a common misconception, I don't know. But I didn't love that angle. I don't think we needed the whole if you don't come and see me, I will come to heaven to see you angle to make it emotional. Just a letter from a child who is clearly in a bad situation would have been enough. So I don't love that decision. MJ is trying to find who wrote this letter, whether it is a child or not, and David, who is a writer, received these beautiful but mysterious paintings, and I feel like this part of the narrative is very, very forced. I find it really difficult to get behind David's involvement in this. To begin with, I would say it took about half of the film for me to start buying into the narrative and believing what happened. Not only is it very slow to begin with for a good half of the film, but the narratives are just really forced. They don't feel very believable, and I don't mean they're not believable as in they would never happen, because there are many Christmas films where we have Christmas magic that makes things happen, and even though they're not realistic, the narrative structure still makes sense. And I just feel like there were too many instances at the beginning of the film, and indeed again for about half of the film, where things just felt really forced. Things didn't flow from one place to the next very well at all, and I just feel like it was very poorly written. But after about the halfway mark, it started to pick up a little bit, because MJ meets David and they both realise they're both following the same mystery. And I don't want to say too much about how the paintings might be connected to the story of the letter written to Santa by the child, but eventually things started to go in a direction that made a little bit more sense. But it is very poorly written for a lot of the film, and I feel like it needed a lot of work for it to be an enjoyable narrative. It also took a long time for any of the characters to be likeable. To be honest, I don't think I ever truly liked any of the characters, but they were very flat for a very long time, and that meant that when the narrative was poorly written and we didn't have very interesting characters, there was just not a lot to enjoy about this film. Again, for about half of it. It might not have been the halfway mark, but roughly it took about half of the film to actually turn things around for it to be an enjoyable film with decently written characters. However, I will say once it picks up, it actually becomes quite enjoyable. It also becomes quite predictable in some ways, but I didn't really care too much about that. It does become a decent film. I didn't come away from this feeling like it was a very well-written narrative, but I was satisfied with ultimately where it went, with the progression and pacing of the second half of the film, and the characters became, if not interesting, at least better written. And we have a nice enough amount of Christmas. We have Christmas decorations and things, so it does feel like a very Christmassy, wintry film. So I was quite happy with that part of it. And in general, it's an okay film. If the first half had been better written, if it had taken less time to get to a point where it became an enjoyable film, maybe I would have come away from it saying, actually, yeah, it was pretty decent. But I would say it needs a lot of work. But that being said, if you're looking for a Christmas film that you haven't seen, and you don't mind a very, very slow start to ultimately get to a film that ends up being not too bad, then I'd recommend it. However, it isn't perfect, definitely a lot of room for improvement, but I didn't regret the time spent watching it. A Town Without Christmas is an okay film with some good messages, some decent performances. As a Patricia Heaton fan, obviously I enjoyed watching Patricia Heaton. In this one, her character was fine. I didn't particularly care for her, but she was okay. There are some good points about this film. It takes a very long time to get there, but if it sounds like a film that might appeal to you, then I'd say A Town Without Christmas is probably worth watching.